Hello and welcome to our 2017 installment of E4, the Last Lecture Series. The E4 Last Lecture Series is a yearly event that we host in the HWCOE. Our engineering ambassadors hosted this year. Special thanks to Josh and Emma and our special events committee for putting all this on. A big round of applause for them. So the idea behind E4 is that we give a distinguished professor the opportunity to speak to the student body outside of the classroom. The E4 lecture is made to both recognize the accomplishments and the effort of an incredible professor each year and to give a wider range of students the ability to hear them speak. This year we look for professors that integrated their passion into their careers, and we believe that we may have found one of the most passionate professors on campus. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Anil Rao as this year's E4 lecturer. Professor Rao earned his BS in Mechanical Engineering and his AB in Mathematics from Cornell, his MSc in Aerospace Engineering from the University of Michigan, his PhD in Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering from Princeton University. Professor Rao's research interests lie in the area of control and optimization of space and air vehicles, and combine the development of new computational methods for optimal control with novel applications including space mission planning, performance optimization of atmospheric flight vehicles, and other vehicular control problems. He has won numerous teaching awards in his career here, including the MAE Department Teacher of the Year. And Dr. Rao has a true passion for teaching, as I'm sure you're going to find out by the end of the lecture. And that's all I have to say. As Dr. Rao would always say, it's all about the process. And with that, I'd like to give it over to you. And please welcome Dr. Rao, our E4 lecturer.
Thank you for that great introduction. And thank you to the engineering ambassadors for allowing me the privilege of being able to be up here tonight. It's kind of funny because when I first got the email about this, I ignored it because I thought it was spam, so I was like, and then I got another email apparently a week and a half later, 2 weeks later, whatever it was, and I ignored that one as well because I thought it was just further spam. So then what happened was Josh came to my office and he said, did you get the email from the engineering ambassadors? And I said, who are the engineering ambassadors? I had no idea what he was talking about. And I was like, oh, that email. Oh yeah. And yeah, we were wondering if you're interested in doing this. I said, what's this? So I had to go flipping through my iPhone, and I was looking at the emails, and I'm like, oh man, sure do I feel stupid, here I am, like having this, this opportunity to do this, and I didn't even read the email correctly, right? Then I looked at the email properly, and I was like, wow, this sounds like fun. Let's do this. This sounds great. So here I am, and integrating passion into my career. So then, and what success means to me? Well, this was a hard one to put together because, in some sense, giving a talk on this isn't necessarily like gonna do it all by itself. So I think what I decided to do instead was just show you, right? Rather than actually talk about this. I'm going to talk about things as we go along, and there's some funny stories along the way. But I'm going to start with this because this kind of symbolizes who I am and what I'm all about. This is a poem by Walt Whitman, and I'm going to read it, and then we're going to go on from here. And it goes like this. The poem is called "O Me, O Life." O me, O life, of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, of myself forever reproaching myself, for who more foolish than I, and who more faithless, of eyes that vainly crave the light, of the objects mean, of the struggle ever renewed, of the poor results of all, of the plotting and sordid crowds I see around me, of the empty and useless years of the rest, with the rest me intertwined. The question, O me, so sad, recurring, what good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists, and identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute the verse. That's where we start. All right? So this is what I've been doing ever since I was a kid, and trying to figure out, what is it that I should be doing with my life? What is my verse? And it's taken me a long time to figure out what my verse is, not because I ever doubted really that I could do something with my life, but I just really never found the thing that I wanted to do until things happened in my life and weird events took place, and all of a sudden it just seemed to be channeling me in directions that actually took me where I wanted to go. So this is the first thing I'm going to start with is, how did I get to the point? Because I do aerospace engineering as in the introduction here. I do a lot of work with space mission planning. I do a lot of work with atmospheric flight mission planning. I'm not going to bore you with all the details and all that stuff. That's just a bunch of engineering. So the thing here is, how did I get to the point that I like all this stuff? Well, so let's look at things that actually started off in my life as being big, monumental events that I remember as a kid. And the first one, which is of course an event that everybody who was alive and old enough to remember, was the Apollo 11 landing, and I was just barely old enough to remember it. I just remember Neil Armstrong setting foot on the moon. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what the moon was. I had no idea what all this stuff was. I was watching it on some 4-inch television in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is the first place I lived. And my parents said, you need to go watch this. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go watch it. So I had the Apollo 11 landing. But then I had the opportunity to watch other events, and you notice that all of these have something to do with aerospace engineering, which is why they're all up here. And one of the events I remember did really, really well. It was amazing. I was in 9th grade and at DeWitt Junior High School in Ithaca, New York, and the principal of the school had said that everyone was ordered to go to the cafeteria, and they had a television screen. Now, come on, they don't have television screens like this back then. They had little tiny television screens, right? So we're like 400 of us or whatever in the middle school. I don't know how many we had in the middle school. Whatever it was, there were a bunch of us sitting in the cafeteria, and we were watching this puny screen. What were we watching? We were watching the Space Shuttle Columbia's maiden voyage. It was the landing at Edwards Air Force Base, as you can see, on 14 April 1981. And it was the most amazing thing to see this bird come in from outer space. You just couldn't imagine that they could do this. 1981, no one had ever flown a reusable launch vehicle like this before. And there it was, and the video was there, the NASA feed was on as this thing came in, the parachutes opened, and this beautiful, beautiful object came in and landed. And it just stunned me that I actually was able to see this live. I didn't have to watch it on a video later. I was there. I was actually in that room in my middle school with a television, with a live feed at Edwards Air Force Base, and it was the most incredible thing. And subsequently, so many other things just happened at the same time, throughout the early parts of my life. And one of them was Galileo's arrival at Jupiter. Again, you think about how these things actually took place, and you ask yourself, wow, could I be a part of this? Could I actually maybe contribute in some meaningful way to these things? I even woke up. This was truly an epiphany. It's October 15th, 1997. Cassini was about to be launched on a Titan IV Centaur from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida. And I knew Cassini was going to be launched, but of course I was like, well, I don't know when they're going to launch it. And they kept delaying the launch. Because there was all these issues with the fact that Cassini was carrying 72 pounds of plutonium because it was going to Saturn. And of course, that is a concern for everybody. But on top of all that, no one really knew when Cassini was actually going to wind up launching. But the launch window opened on October 15th, 1997. And it was 3 o'clock in the morning in California, which is where I was living at the time. And I woke up 5 minutes before the Cassini launch. I was sleeping. And I woke up and I said, Cassini's about to launch. Turned the television on, and I got to see Cassini launch, right? And it was just amazing, because had I missed it, had I been 5 minutes late, 7 minutes later, had I been, passed out on my bed or whatever it was, I would have missed it, right? And then I would have had to do what everybody else does, which is watch it, watch the recording. I didn't want to watch the recording. I wanted to see it, right? But all of these things have a theme to them, as you can see. They all have something to do with the space program. They all have something to do with aerospace engineering, which is how I got interested in aerospace engineering in the first place. Now, of course, no story that I ever give is going to be complete without some sports, right? So the first place I lived in my life was Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I lived there for about a year and a half when I first moved to the United States. My father was doing his PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. And I became a big Philadelphia sports fan. So, of course, the other events that were really important in my life were that the Flyers won their first Stanley Cup in 1974, and I got to see that. And then the Phillies won their first World Series in 1980, and of course that's a story for the ages. And then I got to see the 76ers win the NBA championship, and I got to see the U.S. Olympic hockey team win the gold medal in 1980 at the Olympics. You'll notice that hockey's up here twice, because hockey's my favorite sport. But of course you'll notice that there's one thing missing from this, which is the Philadelphia Eagles. Because the Philadelphia Eagles
have never won a Super Bowl, right? And so my whole thing is, they're never going to win a Super Bowl, right? Every time you think the Eagles are going to do well, and so they're missing from this whole thing, so the Eagles don't get any accolades tonight, but unfortunately, they have a good team this year, but unfortunately, they're not part of this story, so because they didn't win anything. So, and well, that's too bad. But the other Philadelphia sports team. So anyway, so that's my little excursion into sports for the evening. What I believe, and this I've believed ever since I was in school, is that I really believe that engineers change the world. You will actually see this twice in this presentation. You will see it now, and you will see it later. Okay, at the very end. So the thing is that I grew up, and I wanted to, when I wanted to think about being an engineer, when I finally got to that point, I always thought of engineering as being like this, sort of robotic, kind of calculating subject. Nobody has any emotion. Nobody thinks about anything. No one's creative. No one thinks about how, and anything beyond just the X's and O's. And so when you think about engineering, it's like, well, that sounds really boring. It's like, who wants to do that, right? I mean, that's not what I want to do with my life. I want to do interesting things. I want to be creative. I want to think about the world in a way that I can make a difference somehow, somewhere. But I don't want it to be like down here in the noise. Who wants to worry about the noise? So I don't believe that, right? What I believe is that engineers have all of these great attributes, which people don't associate with them because everyone thinks engineers are just technocrats. But they're not. Because if you think about all the things that engineers have done over the years, whether it be the iPhone that you hold in your hand, whether it be Apollo 11 landing on the moon, you have to be artistic. You have to understand history. You've got to understand philosophy, because if you don't understand all this stuff, you won't be able to integrate things. And that's what engineers do. Engineers integrate. They look at different things, nothing that have anything to do with each other, and they find solutions to problems. And that is what engineering, to me, is all about. And that's the way I teach. That's the exact way in which I do everything. Because in the end, what are you going to learn? What are you going to remember when you take a class? You're going to remember the concepts. You're going to remember the deep structure. You're not going to remember formulas. You're not going to remember numbers. Nobody knows that stuff. Five minutes after an exam is over, that's not what you're going to remember. A year after you take a class, that's not what you're going to remember. You're going to remember whether you learned anything. And whether you learned anything has to do with all of this stuff. It doesn't have to do with all the X's and O's. And that is fundamentally the way I look at engineering. I've always looked at it that way. Everything I do works that way. Language is such an important part of engineering. And like they said at the beginning, the process is so important, right? So you don't get credit for something if you don't do the process, right? So anyone who's taken my class knows this, right? That I basically am completely a process-driven person. So if you don't have the process right, you don't get any credit. I don't care what the final answer is, because the answer doesn't matter, right? The answer is irrelevant, right? What matters is that you know what you're doing, right? Because if you know what you're doing, you can work your way through almost anything, right? So along the way, there are lots of people who have inspired me. And they've inspired me to be the person that I am today, and the way I communicate to other people, the things that I think are important, so hopefully they'll think that some of this stuff is important. And these are only a few, because I can't put everybody up here, but these are people who have really made a difference to me in my life. And the first one's my dad. My father's a professor at Cornell University, and my father is the typical person who, no matter how far he ever gets in his life, nothing ever changes for him. He is 81 years old now, and he works just as hard at 81 as he did when he was 21. That's the way he is. He never gives up on anything. He's got more passion for life than virtually anybody I've ever met. Not because not for any other reason other than he just loves what he does. He gets up in the morning and he is on a mission. That is what he is. And he taught me that nothing in the world substitutes for hard work. It doesn't matter. And the reward for hard work, as my father always used to say, it's more hard work. Right? So that's it. That's what you get. And that's my dad. The other people, my high school calculus teacher, who, to be honest with you, I don't think I ever had a teacher in my life who made me feel the way he feels. He made me feel. He was amazing. I still remember what it was like to be in his BC calculus class. He had this unbelievable ability to be able to reach out to everybody. It didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter how much you were struggling with the material. He had the ultimate patience, and he had the ability to just take you through things in this slow and gentle and meaningful way that just made you want to learn. You just wanted to be a part of it somehow, some way, and he was incredible. I can never forget what it was he did for me, because he really was the first person who set me on a track where I wanted to do something that was really mathematical in my life. I mean, I always liked math and everything, but I wasn't sure until I really got into his high school, into that BC calculus class when I was a senior in high school. The other one is Andrew Ruina, who's a really good friend of mine now, and he's a professor at Cornell, and he was my first teacher of dynamics in my life, which of course anyone who's ever taken a class from me knows that I teach dynamics at the University of Florida. And Andy was the ultimate person who just made learning fun. Like anytime you saw him, he always had a smile on his face. That's probably the least smile I'll ever see on him is to get a formal picture taken. But Andy is an amazing person. Everything about him is amazing. He was goofy, he was fun, he was intellectual, he was one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, and he just made it fun. Like you could not take his class and not have fun. That was it. And then the last one, of course, is my PhD advisor, Ken Mees, who's now a professor at the University of California, Irvine. And I will have to say that I wasn't the easiest PhD student in the world to deal with. So, I think the last word I had with him when I finished my PhD was almost exactly what I put up here. I was sitting in his office after I was done with my PhD, and I just said to him, Ken, I just have one thing I really want to tell you. And he said, what's that? I said, thanks so much for putting up with me for the last several years. I said, I know I haven't been the easiest person in the world to deal with. And I said, how can I repay you? And he said to me, you can repay me by going out into the world and doing the same thing that I did for you for somebody else. That's how you do it. And so that set me on the course of what I believe everybody should do, which is there's no concept in my life and no concept in my mind of payback. There's no payback. There's no retribution, none of that stuff. There is pay forward. That's how we work, right? When somebody does something for you, you return the favor by doing it for somebody else. And then that person returns the favor by doing it for somebody else. And that's what makes the world a better place. That's how we grow. That's how civilization evolves. That's how everything we do, life in general, is all about paying forward. And I believe in pay forward. I don't believe in payback. There's no payback, right? So no one ever has to pay me back for anything, because I don't think that's the right way to go. Go do something good for somebody else, and you will have paid me back. That's the way it works. And so these people had one thing in common. They all chased their passions. And they taught me that no matter what I do with my life, that's what I need to do. I need to chase my passion. And it's not about the things that I thought it was. So, as I was growing up, so let's see, what are the sources of my passion? I was growing up, but there are lots of things that, in my life now are the sources of my passion. The first ones are the three beautiful people in this picture, because there's a fourth one that's not. And they are, of course, my wife and my two kids, and that's my daughter and my son. And they are like, everything that you would want. And they drive you crazy, and then they make you happy, and then they do all these other things, and it just is amazing, right? Because that's what life is all about, and it should be that way. So, that's the first one, and that of course, trumps everything else. But everything else is important too. So spacecraft and rockets. So again, you'll see the theme that I love space. I love atmospheric flight. I love optimal control, which is what I do research in. I love all this stuff, right? But it all happened because of experiences that I had as a kid, and it just keeps happening. Like no matter what, I continue to love it. And the other thing I love, and again, this is all boring stuff, right? Now you're going to get boring on me, right? I'm like, the algorithms and software? Who wants to deal with that, right? So I didn't come here to talk about algorithms and hear about algorithms and software. I want to hear about other stuff, right? So this is the only slide you're going to see about algorithms and software, right? But I got to tell you that that's the thing that actually makes me go. It's like one of the things that I just really love is algorithms and software. But really, that's not what gets me up in the morning. What gets me up in the morning is that I have a very, very limited amount of ability. Just a little bit, right? Just somewhere along the way, God gave me this little bit, and I am going to use it, and I want to make people's lives better. And I love making young people's lives better, because all of you sitting in this room have the opportunity to change the world. You really do. You can't like I can't oversell that. It is really important that all of you understand that you are at the point in your careers where lots of different things can happen to you, but you all have the potential to make an impact in the world, and a really, really big impact. And that's where I come in, is that my goal is to make it possible for you to be able to do that, right? So again, it's not really about me, right? It's about all the things that I can do to make other people's lives better. It's not about, I mean, it could easily be about me, but that's not going to help anybody, so there's no point in doing that. That's not what I believe in. So how did it all happen? And this is where I had to spend some time kind of going through old stuff that I've never thought about, I don't think about very often. But let's see. So the first place I lived in the United States was Philadelphia when I moved here when I was 2.5 years old. But a year and a half after that, I moved to Ithaca, New York. My father got a job at Cornell University, and he's still at Cornell University. So Ithaca is like one of my favorite places in the world, and Ithaca truly is an amazing town. It's a place that's completely off the beaten path. It's completely away from everything, but it's an absolutely spectacularly gorgeous town. In the winter and in the summer, if you can get past the fact that you can't drive in the winter because the roads are terrible and the weather's awful. But one of the things I love about Ithaca is Ithaca's in the middle of nowhere, right? So this is the thing, like my father actually took this picture. He went and got a t-shirt. This was last week, so this is a pretty new picture. Ithaca, New York, centrally isolated. Look at it, look at where it is. It's in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean, it's not near this, it's not near that. There's Lake Ontario up here. It's like, how in the world do you get to Ithaca, New York? You have to really want to go to Ithaca, New York. You cannot just get, you're driving, but hey, let's stop in Ithaca. You don't do that, okay? That's not the way it happens. It's like, we have to find a trek. It's got to be a special excursion that takes us on this path. Because trust me, when you're on the last 30 or 40 miles getting to Ithaca, New York, at that point, whatever it is, you're like, are we there yet? Because, this is getting really boring. It's like, and that's really Ithaca. It is in the middle of nowhere, right? But Ithaca has so much charm, and I got the chance to get a phenomenal education in Ithaca, New York. So there's my elementary school, which is still there. There's my middle school, which is still there. And there's my high school. This is the most amazing thing because I got a chance to be a student at Ithaca High School. And you think Ithaca High School, what's the big deal? Well, I found out what the big deal was, and a lot of it I didn't really like all that much, but let's start from the beginning. So when I was in elementary school, so this is me being, I don't know how old I was, 7, 8, something like that. It's a horrible picture, right? Again, it's like, my brother looks a lot better than I do. So, but in any case, that's the first picture. And then, growing up, I had to deal with my dad, right? So my father being a perfectionist and being the person who everything has to be right. So this is what I have to deal with as a child, right? It's like the only grade is an A, right? Everything else is an F, right? So I had to bring home a B, and so he would just see F. That's what he would see, right? And I was like, if I brought home anything else, it wouldn't even be worth talking about, So this is the life I had. But you have to remember, my father grew up in South India. He didn't have any money growing up. He was really, really poor. His whole life, he's a self-made person. His whole thing is you got to work. That's all there is. There's work. Because if you don't work, you're not going to get anywhere, right? And after a while, he actually penetrates you because you realize that he's probably right, So it's like, and I have to deal with this, right? So everything has to be an A. But it wasn't just at home that it had to be that way, right? So here I am, this is 3rd grade, and I'm already faced with, I got to get A's and everything, right? And I'm in 3rd grade. There's me, there's a blow up, I'm like, but hey, you know what? I had to show you a picture from this time period, right? Because if I don't, you're not going to believe me, right? It says Northeast Elementary School. See, right there, Northeast School. I told you Northeast School, right? So that's me in this crazy time period. And the funny thing is, a lot of the people in this photo I'm still friends with, which is actually kind of wild. It's like after all these years, we're still friends. Anyway, I wound up, like I said, Ithaca High School. It was the class of 1984. 1984, right? So that's really Orwellian, right? So it's like there's a book. I think there's a book, right? It's named after 1984. I think it's called 1984, right? So so in any case, I was the class of 1984, and so 1984 was an interesting year for a lot of reasons because Rolling Stone magazine says 1984 was the #1 year in the history of pop music, which whether you believe it or not, or whether you agree with it or not, is true. Now, this is a picture over here of the National Honor Society from 1984. There's me, right there, right? So in any case, you can see that I'm like in the midst of all this chaos. Well, what was this chaos? So I went to school with a bunch of complete type A personalities, people who were significantly smarter than me, and I just had a hard time dealing with this because everybody was high-powered. The girl who graduated #1 in my class went to Princeton and then went to Stanford and then became a member of the National Academy of Science when she was 47 years old, and she's amazing. She's an amazing person. But these are the kind of people I had to deal with going to school, right? So me, being whoever I was, with my marginal amount of intelligence, had to deal with all these people, and I had a hard time with it because I wasn't as good as they were. They were really, really good. It was an insanely competitive environment. It was really, really difficult to keep up. But I managed it, and I managed to get through high school as difficult as that was, and I learned a lot in the process too. Because the one thing I learned, and this is what I do now, is that when you're surrounded by really smart people, it makes you better at what you do. That's the one thing that you get, which I didn't understand when I was 15 years old, right? Why in the world would I surround myself around? I want to be surrounded by a bunch of people who are much smarter than me. Well, help me be more competitive, help me get better at what I do. And I never got the chance, in some ways I never got a chance to thank everybody for that, because the truth is that if it hadn't been that kind of a competitive environment, I don't know if I would have gotten as far as I have. Not that I've gotten very far, but but then, being a Cornell University town, Ithaca, I got the amazing opportunity in my life to attend Cornell University. And this was where my life started to change and what I really thought about. I thought about what I wanted to do. So, what is the typical thing that an 18-year-old Ivy League student wants to do? Well, it's about making money, right? Everything in life is about making money. There's nothing else in life except for money. Money is everything, right? So, the first thing you do is you say, well, I'm going to become a doctor, right? So, because why would I become a doctor? A doctor because I can chase the money, right? Because doctors make lots of money. So what happened was, freshman year in college, I'm taking biology, and I'm like, this is the worst thing in the world. This? I'm sitting there memorizing all these things, Krebs citric acid cycle and all kinds of other stuff. I got this biology book that's like this thick, and I'm like going through it, and I'm like, this is awful. Like, if I have to spend the rest of my life doing this, I'm going to puke, and I don't want to do that, right? So I don't want to be in this situation, right? So then I thought, well, what's something else I can do besides biology that would be like my passion and the thing that I would really want to do? Well, of course, what's the next thing you can do to chase money? Is you can go get an MBA, right? So I can go get an MBA. My father was a business school professor. So, of course, I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe I just missed the boat the first time around. I'll do it this time. And what happened was, during my time at Cornell, I wound up being a co-op at General Electric Plastics, which is no longer owned by General Electric, but it's in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And I was really excited about this co-op job because I got the chance to do technical marketing, and I was getting a chance to do all kinds of other things. Within 4 days of this job, I was falling asleep. I was the worst thing in the world. I hated it. I just couldn't stand it. I was so boring. There was nothing interesting, no innovation, nothing like that. And so then I thought, well, maybe an MBA isn't the right thing for me to do either. So then at the end of college, I just realized, this isn't what's going to get me anywhere. I'm not going to be happy doing this just because there's lots of money in it, because I didn't enjoy it. And if I didn't enjoy it, I had to figure out something else to do with my life. And that's when I stopped chasing money. And it took a couple of years to get there, right? So stop chasing the money and start chasing your passion, right? Well, what was my passion? So that's what I had to figure out. And I realized that when I was coming to the end, after I had done that co-op at General Electric, and I was back in school, and I was really getting interested in all of the wonderful stuff I was learning in my advanced courses as an undergraduate, control systems just seemed like something that was going to work for me. And so I knew at that point that I wanted to do something with technology development, and I knew that I wanted to teach. It was like that last year of undergrad was when something just registered, and I said, you know what, this is what I really want to do with my life. So I had to go get a PhD. So, of course, earning a PhD, the great paper chase, right? So PhDs are difficult. PhDs are everything that everyone's at hard work and all the stuff that I've been talking about. So here's how it starts. I actually was I was doing control systems, and so here's a joke that my friend Suresh Joshi actually, he has this wonderful website that does control cartoons. So we did lots of proofs because I was learning control theory, right? So what are the different methods of proof? Well, there's deduction, there's induction, there's construction, and of course there's intimidation, right? So like, you know, that's the way we did things. Why do we do it that way? Because we didn't know half the things that we were trying to figure out how to do. So we had to convince other people, right? The only way you can convince them is just intimidate them, right? Because then eventually, if you do enough, they'll be like, oh, well, I just believe you, right? So that's the end of that, right? So that's what I learned in grad school. I was doing all this stuff with theorems and proofs and control theory, and I was at the University of Michigan, and I was on my way through my master's degree, and all of a sudden, the world started to change. The Cold War came to an end in 1989, the Berlin Wall came down, the Soviet Union was very quick to collapse a couple of years after that. But I was in aerospace engineering, and Michigan was falling on really hard times in terms of funding that year, so I had to apply somewhere else. I started at the University of Michigan. I probably would have stayed there for my PhD if I'd had the chance to do it. I didn't really have the chance to do it, but something happened. Princeton said yes, and I was like, wow, Princeton. I was like, okay, maybe I can do that, right? I don't know, probably not good enough for Princeton. I'm not that smart, right? So I got to Princeton, and of course I felt the same way at Princeton as I felt when I was in high school, which is basically that I'm around a bunch of brilliant people, and I'm not very brilliant, so I had to figure out a way to get through this, right? So what I did was, I did what any normal person would do. I worked like crazy, right? That's what I did, and that's how I got my PhD. And I really wanted an academic position, because I knew that was my end goal. And what happened was, couldn't find one. Mid-1990s, that just wasn't a good time looking for an academic position. But I got a chance to do yet something else. So here I was with a PhD in hand, and I got a job at the Aerospace Corporation in Los Angeles. And the Aerospace Corporation is a big federally funded research and development center that does a lot of work in space technology. They do a lot of work for the Air Force. And I got the chance to see things that I never thought I would ever get to see in my life. First, I got all these cool projects to work on. I got to work on all kinds of stuff with launch vehicle mission analysis. I was like, this is really awesome, right? And then I got a chance to work on all kinds of cool orbital transfer stuff. That was really cool too. And I got the chance to work on debris, right? I was like, I don't know anything about debris. It's like somebody hands me a problem and says, we need to figure this out. And I'm like, I don't know anything about this. Well, you have a PhD, you figure it out, right? So that's how this works, right? That's why we're paying you, because otherwise, why did you spend all those years in school? And I said, yeah, that's a really good point. But, it's like, so I guess I'll do that, okay? I'll figure out it. And the answer is, you can't say that there is no answer, right? The answer is you got to find a way to do it, right? That's how this works. Otherwise, they'll just find somebody else to do it, and they're not going to have you do it, right? But after a few years doing this, it just wasn't what I wanted to do. It was like, I liked it, and I hated living in Los Angeles, but I liked what I did, but it just still wasn't the thing I wanted to do. So I kept searching. And then things happened in the weirdest way. So what I'm about to show you is a little bit strange, but I really wanted to get back to academics. So the first thing that happened was, in the year 2000, things started to happen. There's my wife, and we got married, there's my son, and it was one of these things that something else right along the way came up, and that was, I got a chance to work at 555 Technology Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Draper Laboratory. So Draper is another not-for-profit research lab, and they do all kinds of work in guidance and control of aerospace vehicles and stuff, and there was a really cool opportunity here for me to be a lot closer to academics. Draper's in Cambridge, it's in Boston. Boston's the epicenter of the world when it comes to academics. Maybe something was going to rub off here. I don't know. But I got there and I was so bored at Draper. I was so bored. I was like at meetings and schedules and this thing and that thing. So most of my job was spent doing this kind of stuff, right? And I'm like, but that's not what I want to do, right? And I'm like, well, what's going on here? But there was 5% of it that just drove me and loved it. I got the chance to do cool research. I got a chance to work on everything from spacecraft formation flying to trajectory optimization stuff, which I still do today. And I got the chance to supervise a couple of MIT students, and that was a lot of fun. It was really amazing. And I knew at that point that this is what I wanted to do. So there I was at Draper. Most of my job wasn't all that exciting, but there was a part of it that was. And then weird things started to happen. how do I make this happen? So this is the hard part, is that once you get a certain ways into your career, it becomes a little bit more difficult to navigate your way, because then you have more experience and you kind of get locked in, and people associate you with doing certain kinds of work, and your resume gets built in a certain way and all this stuff. And so I needed to figure out a way to do this before it was too late. And what happened was I got stuck on these projects, which were kind of dead end, but they were forever projects that I just couldn't get myself out of it. Which leads me to, of course, the following quote from Hotel California, which was, "Relax," said the night man. "We are programmed to receive. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave." Right? So that was where I was. I had checked out, but I can't leave. Right? So then weird things started to happen. Literally, I can't make this up. Out of nowhere, a funny thing happened to me one day on the way to the forum. It was August 2001, and this is what happened. I got a phone call out of the blue from John Balliol, who at that time was the chairman of the mechanical engineering department at Boston University. And I was like, I talked to John once in my life previously to that, and he remembered me. I guess he remembered me that I was a draper. He asked me a question. "We need somebody to teach engineering dynamics. Are you interested?" And I was like, "Yeah, I am seriously interested. This is really cool," right? And I was like, "Why did you think of me?" He said, I knew you worked at Draper, and I knew that, they do a lot of work with guidance and control of aerospace vehicles, and I figured, I'll just give you a call. I have no faculty that can teach dynamics." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Because they're all on sabbatical. So everybody's out, right? They're all on vacation for a year, right? So I got this wonderful opportunity to teach dynamics." And of course, many of you who've taken dynamics from me think that, well, I really know what I'm talking about. Well, let's see how it started. Right? So the first thing was, I could have said no. I was like, because he said to me, "The salary is terrible." And I looked at him and I was like, "You really think I'm going to take an adjunct faculty position for the salary? It's not about the money. It's got to be about me wanting to do something that I really want to do," right? So oh my gosh. So then I was like, I'm going to take this. This is one of those carpe diem moments that I have to do this, right? So I was so excited. I got a chance to teach. This is what I always wanted to do with my life, right? So here I am preparing all my notes, August of 2001. I'm going through the book, and I'm like, oh, they're going to love this. This is going to be so cool, right? This is going to be the greatest thing in the world, right? Let's just say that that's really not the way it happened. Okay, so this wasn't really the way I wanted it to start, but, some things happen. So the first thing happened was very first lecture. And me, with all of the energy that I've got, I'm sitting there writing on the board, I'm doing all this linear algebra, I've got matrices, matrix transposes, I've got all this weird stuff going on, and then all of a sudden, 45 minutes into class, a student raises their hand. I'm completely checked out at this point, because I'm thinking, this is awesome, right? I'm deriving everything from first principles, and this is all going really, really well. Nobody's asking any questions, they're all scribbling notes, it's furiously copying notes. I'm writing 7,000 miles a minute, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is horrible, it's so finally, student raises his hand. He has a question. I turn around, and I said, okay, sure, what's your question? And he says, what's a matrix transpose? And I said, looked at him, stared, walked up to him like this. And I said, have you not taken linear algebra? And he shakes his head, no. I looked around. I said, has anyone in the room taken linear algebra? Everybody shook their heads. Everybody. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do? I completely messed this up, right? So I was like, I guess nobody understood what I was talking about, right? So they had no idea what I was talking about. Nothing. I literally could have been just writing in hieroglyphics, and they would have been just as good with that as whatever I wrote, right? So there I was. I wanted to do this. I wanted to teach. This was the thing I've been waiting to do for I don't know, since the beginning of time, And here I was, completely messed this whole thing up. I completely messed it up. I felt terrible. I was like, what am I supposed to do? So here's what I did. Told the class, here's what we're going to do. So at Boston University, classes are twice a week for an hour and a half. So we were 45 minutes into a 90-minute lecture. And I said, we're going to stop.
And they said, what do you mean we're going to stop? We still have 45 minutes left. I said, yes, but if you really want me to keep going with these notes that I have in my hand here, you're going to be really sorry. Right? So that's not, you don't want to do that, right? And so what happened was, I said, everybody in the room, very seriously, I was deadpan about this when it happened. I said, everyone, I want you to take all the sheets of paper that you have written your notes on, and I want you to tear them out of your notebooks and throw them in the garbage. I will incinerate them, burn them, do whatever you want to do, but don't ever look at them again, because we are starting this thing again next lecture. And of course, what's the reaction that you're going to get? This is your very first lecture that you've ever taught in your life. You got about 50 students at Boston University who are paying good money to go to college, and they're looking at you and they're like, you have no idea what you're talking about, right? And surely I really didn't know what I was talking about. That was the problem. And so there I was, and as the students were leaving the classroom, I could hear them murmuring under their breath. And it's like, this is going to be an extremely long semester, because I had completely lost all credibility at that point. There was nothing I could do. So what did I do? Well, I had to figure out what to do, right? I was like, this is not going well, right? So I had to rethink this whole process. Every single thing I had to start over again. And it was not that easy, but you know what? I really, really wanted to do it. It wasn't about the money. They weren't paying me enough for this to be about the money. This is what I always wanted to do with my life. And now, you know what they say, be careful what you ask for, because you might actually get it, right? That's what I had. I had a class full of students. I had no idea what I was doing. I needed to go figure it out, right? So I spent the whole semester going through this. And it was one of these things that I was like, whole time, this is what I was going through my head. I was like, I'm writing, lectures that followed this. And I'm like, please be okay with this, really, because it's like I really screwed this up. I really need the opportunity to redeem myself. This is what was going through my head, right? I was like, and so what happened was there was weird stuff that just occurred. And this story, I honestly cannot make this up. I don't think my wildest imagination could ever come up with this story. I finished that semester. It was fall of 2001, and it actually wound up going pretty well. I mean, the students were happy with everything. They asked me to teach the class again the next semester. So now we're in spring of 2002. And it's about April 2002 one day, and it's about 5:30 in the evening. My class was at 6 o'clock. And I usually gave myself about a half an hour to get over to Boston University. So I left at 5:30 from Draper, and I'm driving, and the weather's terrible in Boston that night. It was absolutely horrible. I just completely misjudged and misplanned. There I was on the Longfellow Bridge, and I'm driving across to Boston from Cambridge, and I'm like, I'm never going to make it there on time. Usually I would get there about 5 minutes to 6, and I had enough time to just walk over to the classroom. I wasn't even going to be close. I showed up that night to the classroom at about 6:30 to 6:35. Now, what do you think the average student's going to do when you're over a half an hour late for class? What do you think? So what does everybody think? They're going to leave, right? That's what everybody would do. They would just make like a tree and leave, right? So that's the way it would be. That's what I would do. I'm not going to wait around more than a half an hour. I walk into the classroom at 6:35. So literally, I walk in the door, and the whole class is, everybody's there. And I'm like, you're all still here. Why are you all still here? You should all have left, right? And they said, one of the students in the class said, Professor Rao, I have a question. I said, what's that? And she says to me, I have an announcement I need to make. Can I make it? And I just looked at her like this. You've been sitting here for the last half an hour and you didn't make your announcement? What's wrong with this picture, right? I mean, all of you are here. You could have just made the announcement. She walks up to the podium and she says, every single year, the students in the Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering at Boston University vote for the teacher that's had the greatest influence on them. And this year, the award goes to Professor Rao. And so there it is. And I'm like looking at her, and I'm like, boy, do I feel like a schmuck. The day that they're going to announce that I'm going to win an award like this, I show up over a half an hour late for class, right? So I felt terrible. I was like, you got to be kidding me. And what was weird about it was, I was an adjunct faculty, right? I'm not a permanent faculty member. It was just the most bizarre experience that I could ever have imagined.
And in the process of this, other weird things started to happen. The students said to me at the end of that semester, so I got this award, I was like, oh, it's really nice, it's beautiful, you know, I really appreciate it. It was just one of these things that I just never imagined this would happen. It was like, I wasn't prepared for it, I wasn't thinking about it, but then I found out in my life that that's when a lot of really good things happen. It's when you're not actually looking for them, right? They just happen. And it was just this really special feeling. I called my father and I told him, and I said, Dad, you know, I got this award. Why would they do that? I said, you know, I was like, all the people, why would I get it? I couldn't possibly be that good. There's no way. I'm not that smart. You know, it goes back to my old thing. I'm not that smart, right? So the thing was that I was like, well, maybe this is something I could do, right? But I'm never going to get, I never hadn't gotten any opportunities at this point for a permanent faculty position, so my feeling was, I'm just going to keep doing this adjunct thing and it'll be fun. And the students started to say to me, you know, your notes are really, really good. You should think about writing a book. And I said, write a book? I'm not writing a book. That's not happening. I was like, me write a book? I was like, I started something, but then of course, you know, when the thought finally comes into your head, somebody puts it in your head, you're like, well, maybe in like my wildest dreams, I could think about possibly, 10 lifetimes from now writing a book. And I was like, no, that's not going to happen. So I started to typeset some notes and stuff like this. It was just a monumental task to think about writing a book. That wasn't going to happen. So but I started putting notes together, and then the weirdest thing happened. In 2004, I won the College of Engineering award. Now this was a real problem, okay? Because now we're not talking about a department award, we're talking about a college level award, right? And the faculty all the faculty members, including all adjunct faculty, were eligible for the award, and they had a big ceremony and everything, and they gave me this plaque, and yeah, that's all fine and good. But the point was that as an adjunct faculty, I won the award again. So of course, the interesting thing about this was that the next year, which was 2005, adjunct faculty were no longer eligible for the award, right? Starting 2005, the only people who can be voted are the people who are actually on the permanent faculty, right? Because this was pretty kind of embarrassing for Boston University that the students voted me. I was, again, it's like completely taken aback by all this. In the process of all this, I'm sitting here working on notes for this imaginary book that I'm working on, right? So I'm like sitting here typesetting all this stuff and then going through it, giving them to my class semester after semester. They asked me to teach this class for 5 consecutive years. I taught dynamics every semester at Boston University from 2001 to 2006. And guess what happened in 2005? I actually published a book at the end of 2005, right? And this was one of those things that I'm like, again, I just didn't plan this. It wasn't, but I loved what I was doing. I loved it so much. I used to have weekend office hours at Boston University because I couldn't have them during the week because I was working all the time, right? So Saturday I would schlep myself over to BU. I lived in Framingham at the time, and I would be like, well, let's just get together and let's just do dynamics, right? Dynamics was fun, right? I was having a great time with all this stuff. And it all was all fine at that point because I was like, okay, maybe I'm not doing everything I want to do at Draper. But I'm still having some fun with some stuff. I get to teach this gig on the side. Everything was going well. And then, weird things happened. Weird things happened. So, 2005, December. My daughter was born on the 13th of December. Well, it was her birthday on the 13th. It was my birthday on the 14th, right? So I was like, cool. I was like, that's a pretty good birthday present, right? And what happened? So let's go back through this a little more slowly. December 14th, December 13th, let's see if I can do this and I can play this properly. So I got December 13th, December 14th, and December 15th. They say things happen in threes, right? Things happen in threes, right? So there I was. I'm like on the phone the next week with Carl Crane and BJ Fregley, and I don't know who else was on the search committee that year. I was answering all these questions about how am I going to build a research program at the University of Florida. It was not something that I was thinking about. What happened was this job ad, I saw it on the web somewhere, and I was like, okay, you know what? That's like, I'm not going to get this job. So I just typed up some cover letter, and I put my resume together, put my CV together, and I just shipped it off. And I was just like, completely forgot about it. And then this happened, and I'm like, okay, now, you know what? Like, I can't plan for any of this stuff. So I just like kind of went with the flow at this point, and I got a job interview, and I went and gave a seminar, and I was like all this stuff, and eventually I got a job offer, and I was like, I'm going to be a Gator. I'm moving to Gainesville, Florida. I live in Boston. Am I crazy? I'm moving to Gainesville, Florida. Like I like Boston's the coolest place in the world. It's like the epicenter of academics, and I'm going to be going to Gainesville. And I thought to myself, I'm like, really? I'm going to move to Gainesville? Like, and people are looking at me at Draper. They're like, one of my really good friends at Draper, and he's looking at me. He's like, Gainesville, Florida, eh? And I'm like, yeah, I think it's Gainesville. I think that's the way it works. But you know what? As they say, the University of Florida is in Gainesville, but the Gator Nation is everywhere. And it is everywhere, right? So I got this amazing opportunity to do these things that I never in a million years thought I was going to get the chance to do. I thought my life was going to be this mundane, really boring, thing of, I get to teach on the side, and I get to do this job that pays the bills and all this stuff. And that really is what I thought my life was going to be all about. But it didn't turn out to be that way. And it happened in ways that I would never have planned, but I wouldn't have changed a thing, because it was just amazing how it all happened. And here I am giving this lecture today because all of these things happened, most of which I did not plan for. I just was in the right place at the right time, and it just happened. Well, maybe I'm a little smarter than I give myself credit for, but not much more. Not much smarter, right? Just a little bit, but the thing was that I worked for all this stuff. I worked hard. I was constantly working. I was constantly trying. I never gave up. No matter whether it was something I really liked or whether it was something I really didn't like, I just pushed forward. Always pushing forward. That was the thing. And so what happened when I got here was I had to build a PhD program. How do you build a PhD program? Here's how you build a PhD program. All these amazing people are my current and former PhD students. This is an amazing group. Like, every single person in this picture is just a profound individual. And they make your life so good because they work so hard, and you have to just marvel at them as they do this. And none of this would have happened without all of these amazing people. So this is the first thing that I realized. Now I'm transitioning a little bit into what success means, which is that the first thing you need to do is surround yourself with people who are much smarter than you. But that goes back to when I was in high school, right? Because when I was in high school, I was surrounded by people that were much smarter than me, and it made me better. And then I realized when I went to graduate school, when I went to college, I was surrounded by people who were much better than me. It made me better. So what's the first thing that I had to do when I got to the University of Florida? Surround myself with people who were much better than me, right? And this is what I got. And these people have done just amazing work over the years. It's incredible. And the second thing is that don't take credit for the success. It's not your success, it's their success. This is a lab poster of all the work that we do. But you know what? I didn't do most of this work. They did it. They're the ones who worked, sweated through all their doctoral dissertations and the journal papers and the software and everything else that makes this research program go. I just sat there and marveled at them, right? That's what I did, and I helped them. I gave them some guidance. I did this, I did that. But it was never about me. It's about them, because they're the ones who are getting the education. And all of you are getting your education. And this is what makes this job so much fun. Is the fact that you get to see all these people go from, I have no idea what I'm talking about, to you are not going to tell me what to do, right? Because that's the way it ends, right? But at the end, when students finishing his or her dissertation, here's what happens, is that they don't listen to you anymore, right? They're like, he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? And I'm like, I know a lot more than he does. And I'm like, well, good, because I'm glad it's that way, because I surely hope that I'm not the one who knows more than you do when we're at the end here, right? You better know more than I do. And that's the beautiful thing about this process, is that by the time you're done, your students will argue with you. And that's when you know it's time for them to graduate, right? They need to get out, right? So whatever they do, it's not going to be here. It's going to be somewhere else. I don't care where you go. I don't care what you do. Do something good with your life, but you will not be doing it here, all right? Because you've already been here, right? And that is what makes this an amazing thing, is that just watching that evolution and watching people actually come into being people that you would never have imagined that a few years earlier they would have been. And the other thing is, be nice to everybody. Really seriously. Like, I have learned in my life that there's no benefit to being anything other than kind to people. Because if you don't show them that you care, why in the world are they going to care? They're not going to care, right? When they get up in front of a classroom and I'm teaching and I'm telling other students what to do, I have to show them that I care. I have to be there when they need help in office hours. I have to be there when they ask a question. I have to be in the moment. I have to be present all the time. If you don't demonstrate that, why in the world are they going to listen to you? They're not going to listen to you. They're only going to listen if they have a good reason to listen. And that reason starts with, I care, let's do this, all right? This is really important, not just for you, it's important for me, it's important for all of us, because if this process breaks down, you don't learn this stuff correctly. And if you don't learn it correctly, then somewhere down the line, I become responsible for the fact that this was not done correctly. And I am not going to take that responsibility. That is not going to happen, right? So that is how I got to where I am today. I started off early in my life being blessed with these amazing opportunities to go to school in this wonderful town of 30,000 people in Ithaca, New York. And I was like, it was an incredible thing to be around people who just really were good at what they did, whatever that was, whether it be English, whether it be history, whether it be calculus, or whether it be science. You were just driven to like keep doing things because you were around people who were also incredibly driven, right? And it was amazing. And you know, it really does come down to this for me. Like Theodore Roosevelt has this famous quote: "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." And I really believe that. I really do. Because I've had many teachers in my life who just didn't care. And it's just really hard to get yourself motivated to care when they don't care, right? So that is not something I'll ever do to a student. I will never do that. It doesn't matter. I have a rule for anyone who's going to be taking a class from me next semester or future semesters. I have a rule. If you need help, come to office hours. Can't make office hours? Send me an email. We'll make an appointment. If email doesn't work, text me. If that doesn't work, show up at my office, right? Somehow, some way, we will find time to make this work. That is how it goes, right? But the impetus has to come from you after it comes from me, which means I have to say, yes, I care. Now you have to reciprocate with, okay, he says he cares, so let's see if he really does, right? And then I'm like, okay, let's go for it, right? If this doesn't work the first time, we'll figure out another way to do it, right? If one time a day doesn't work, we'll figure out another time a day. If you have to finally just pick up the phone and call me and ask your questions, then that's the way we're going to do it, right? But we will find a way to do it, because I will make sure that I do my part of this, which is that I will make sure that I'm there when you need the help, right? That's how this works. And that's how teaching, that's the only way you can teach, in my opinion, because if you don't do it that way, no one's going to learn anything, right? No one's going to get anything out of this. It's just going to be a wah, 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 yeah, he's lecturing away, I don't really care about this is really stupid. And everyone will walk out saying they didn't learn anything, right? And that's not the way, I don't want any of my classes to be that way. That's not the way. And so, I'm going to switch topics now, because that's enough about me, right? I want to talk about what got me into this. Oh, remember that slide I put at the very beginning? I talked about space stuff, right? Well, I'm a space junkie, right? I love space stuff. And one of the things that everybody knows is probably historically the most important program that the United States has ever undertaken in space is the Apollo program. And the most famous space mission that everybody knows is Apollo 11, because Apollo 11 landed on the moon. And there's the crew of Apollo 11. Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Aldrin. And the person I feel sorry for in this is Michael Collins, because Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin got the chance to land on the moon, and Michael Collins had to sit there and wait in lunar orbit as they were doing it, right? So he's sitting there looking down, saying, "Hey, you guys okay down there?" You know, and they're like, you know, maneuvering their way down to the moon, and he's like, "Man, I really wish I could be down there with those guys, but then there'd be nobody up here to like take care of this spacecraft, and they have to get back up here, so I guess I'm the one," right? So that's the way it goes. But you know, he was the command module pilot, and he did his job because he was an astronaut, and he was an American hero, and he was going to do the things that American heroes do, right? But that's not the story I want to tell you, because everybody knows this story, right? Everyone's heard the words of Neil Armstrong, "That's one small step for a man, a giant leap for mankind." Everyone's heard this, right? So that's cliche. So that's not the story that is the story I want to tell today. I want to end this with the following story, which is Apollo 8. How many people in this room have ever heard of Apollo 8? Raise your hands really high. Now, do you know what happened? Don't tell anyone what happened. How many people? I want to know. I want to see how many people in this room have a concept of Apollo 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, some of them, okay? Okay. Now, without answering, do you know what happened during Apollo 8? Yes or no? What was Apollo 8? Just in terms, what was the purpose of the mission? That's all I want to know. Don't answer anything else. Do you know?
To go around the moon.
They went around the moon. Okay. All right. So let's think about that for a little bit. Okay. This is Apollo 8. Apollo 8. Since most of the people in the room didn't answer, they didn't raise their hand. Most of the people in this room don't know much about Apollo 8. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Apollo 8, and then I'm going to play something that hopefully will, you know, make you think a little bit, just to finish this off. Apollo 8 was launched on December 21st, 1968. It arrived in lunar orbit on the 24th of December, 1968. What's the significance of the 24th of December? Christmas Eve, 1968. 1968 was not a good year for the United States. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. Bobby Kennedy had been assassinated. 1,200 soldiers were dying every single month in Vietnam. One of the few shining moments of 1968 for this country was Apollo 8. The crew was Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders. This mission was a mission that nobody knew what was going to happen. Think about it. They had never left low Earth orbit. There had no spacecraft in the history of the world that had ever left low Earth orbit, with humans on it or without humans on it. The very first time they ever went to lunar orbit was Apollo 8. Think about it. 1968. This country is already fallen on really, really hard times. In 1967, the Apollo program was almost canceled because the Apollo 1 mission ended in the worst tragedy you could ever imagine. It was a plugs-out test at the Kennedy Space Center. Gus Grissom, Roger Chaffee, and Ed White died in the plugs-out test because a spark was ignited inside the cabin, and it wound up sending this super-saturated cabin with oxygen into flames, and all 3 astronauts died. It was the most horrific thing you could ever imagine, and it almost canceled the Apollo program. So there they were, these 3 astronauts, and they're going to lunar orbit. And they've never gone to lunar orbit before, right? 240,000 miles from home. The only thing that's going to keep them alive is that spacecraft. Who has to design that spacecraft? Engineers have to design that spacecraft, right? That has to be the most fault-tolerant thing that you could ever imagine. Now, we don't have... Okay, let's look at this. I put it away. The computer on board Apollo 8 couldn't do a small fraction of what my iPhone could do. It was wired, and I mean literally wired. The computer was an analog computer. It wasn't a digital computer. It was a bunch of wires plugged into a bunch of op-amps. That's what it was. You probably don't even know what an op-amp is, right? I had to learn op-amps when I was in school, right? Because back then we were doing analog devices too. We weren't doing digital control. We were doing analog control, right? This is really primitive. It's incredibly primitive, and we're sending them to the moon, right? 240,000 miles away with what amounts to the ability to compute the sine of x to 1 decimal place, right? That's all we got. We got 1 decimal place. Oh, cool, that's awesome. I'm good with that 1 decimal, right? So there we are, and they're going to launch from Cape Canaveral on the 21st of December, and they arrive in lunar orbit. There was no second chance, right? So, of course, when they get there, they're looking around, and they're like, we're in lunar orbit, right? So this is pretty cool. We're in lunar orbit, one of 3 people in the world that actually can see the moon, right? And what do you think that they wanted to see and wanted to take a picture of? William Anders had a camera with him. He refused to let Frank Borman or Jim Lovell hold the camera because neither one of them knew how to take pictures. So there he was, sitting there with a camera taking pictures. What do you think the picture was that they really wanted? The Earth, right? There it is, Earthrise, taken by William Anders during the mission, Apollo 8, right? But the crew of Apollo 8 understood something else. They understood the profoundness of this event. They really did. Because human beings had never been that far, right? And here they were in lunar orbit, and this was what actually happened. NASA told them that they were going to go live. So think about this, 1968, they're going to go live on TV, and they're going to have to give a broadcast live to everybody on Earth who was listening at the time. And they were going to have to tell them something, right? And so that something that they had to tell them had to be something that was beyond just staring at the moon. Well, there's the moon, good, cool, that's great, now that's our broadcast, right? No, that wasn't going to be the broadcast, all right? So what I'm about to play for you is what happened during that mission, and what, I can do this right, what they did. And this is what they said. They delivered the following message to the people of Earth.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rao, for that beautiful lecture. Can you have another round of applause? Where you are and what success really means and what inspires you. There's so much passion and kindness radiating from you, and we are so lucky to hear from you tonight. To commemorate this great night, the engineering ambassadors would like to present to you
Thank you.
again. We really appreciate it. Do you have any last words?
I think the crew of Apollo 8 said it.
By the way, if you're recording these lectures, the link will be posted on Engineering Ambassadors Facebook page, the event Facebook page. Also, if you're interested in Engineering Ambassadors, so